Welcome to this edition of In the Interim. I'm Bruce Mueller. I'm the Interim Dean of the University of Michigan College of Pharmacy, and I got a special guest today that I'm really excited to talk with. This is Kevin Townsend. Kevin is currently Senior Director and Executive Medical Lead for U.S. Enterprise at Pfizer, and he's also Adjunct Associate Professor of Pharmacy here at the College of Pharmacy. Kevin's held a lot of different positions over the years, and after receiving his PharmD from the University of Michigan and doing a residency training at Duke, he was a clinical pharmacist at U of M and actually was one of our faculty members at the College of Pharmacy. And he left to join Pfizer and has kind of gone through the ranks. And we're going to talk to him about his journey in industry and how that relates to patient care and all kinds of things, and a lot of submitted questions that we've had from our audience. So with that, I want to say welcome, Dr. Townsend, to the program.
Thank you, Bruce. Happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
I'm really happy that you're here. And you've got a position that's one of the things we've been doing is featuring alumni who have all kinds of different jobs. We've never had anybody with a job like yours. Maybe you could tell us a little bit kind of what you do. We've got the title here, but what does that really mean?
Yeah. So it's been a process, as I'm sure you can imagine. The roots go back to clinical pharmacy, really. I would start with that. And then fast forward to when I joined Pfizer, it was a position that carried over a lot of the same skill sets from my days at Michigan, actually. A lot of outcomes research activities, health economics activities, education activities, working with providers in the area that I covered, making sure that questions about the disease states Pfizer was involved in, medications that we were either launching or had out on the market were addressed adequately. And then some non-disease state, non-medication related questions like medication adherence or health literacy, statistics, clinical research evaluation, things like that. So fast forward to today, my current position, it was a new team that formed about 2 years ago. And it's meant to help Pfizer work closely with some of the leading health systems in the country and be a part of developing the innovations that are driving healthcare right now, whether it's on the digital front or the value definition and the value engagement front from a health payer standpoint. Or real world evidence generation. So carrying over that same theme. So those are kind of the nuts and bolts of what I'm doing right now.
So let's kind of talk about the sort of projects you might get involved in, because I'm trying to understand. Here's Pfizer, pharmaceutical company, but I didn't hear you say a product name anywhere in there. You talked about some much larger data and you talked about quality and value and some of these things. So what would you actually work on, and a health system's got a question? It seems surprising that they would turn to you from Pfizer, for example, for the answer. So maybe walk us through some of that.
Yeah, well, jumping to your last point, I think that's a real interesting one in and of itself. When I first started working for Pfizer, I would say I spent the first good 5 years really staying up at night. What keeps you up at night kind of question of figuring out how to change the perceptions that industry and health systems or academic medical centers always need to be at odds with each other. We're really part of one health system, and kind of aligning strengths and goals. There's a lot more synergies there than there are counterproductive forces. So that is actually changing a lot in recent times. And I think that's driven by, in some respects, out of necessity. Health systems are looking for any and all partners who are willing to come in and work on kind of a level ground alongside them toward the same goals. So let's take, for example, now I'm going to jump to your main question. Let's say there's a new therapeutic area that we are developing medications in, and oftentimes we're not alone. So anyone who's been in pharmacy or healthcare for a while knows that as a new class of meds starts getting developed in phase 1 and phase 2, it's often done across multiple companies at the same time. That's sort of the force of science and how discovery is made and such. So if that new therapeutic area being developed, medicines for that therapeutic area being developed, are really truly innovative where we don't have a lot of treatment options, there are going to be a ton of questions as those medicines near approval. There are going to be questions about which patients are going to be the best candidates. There are going to be questions about the pharmacoeconomic value of those medications. Where do they best fit? Where are they best applied? And a lot of that ties in then to how they get expressed in clinical practice guidelines. So there's a lot of groundwork that sort of happened, I wouldn't say randomly, but it wasn't as systematic as we're trying to make it now. And it wasn't done in collaboration as much with some of these health systems. And I think part of the thought process is if we can partner early on with advanced health systems and help co-design, co-develop some of the data sets, some of the knowledge that's going to eventually lead to where these drugs make sense to be used by practitioners, then we are working in harmony more than just sort of bringing a drug to market. FDA approves it on a Friday, and then on Monday, it's showing up in warehouses and wholesalers, and providers are writing prescriptions, and pharmacists are going, why didn't anyone talk to us about this?
And you've got a sales force behind it that's pushing it in various areas.
Yeah,
Really,
and that's right. And then so our salespeople are generally very well trained in advance of the launch. And at launch, they're often, some of the most knowledgeable people about the medicines going out there, but it's not done in a collaborative way. So I think there is a concerted effort to be more collaborative as much as possible in developing the real world evidence and the value information, the pharmacoeconomics, if you will, that will describe how this medicine should best be utilized in our society.
but it seems interesting because let's say I run a major medical center or list of hospitals or whatever it would be. If I knew that there was these new class of agents coming out and Pfizer would have one of them, it would seem like if I were to contact you to say, hey, let's look at this space and where various drugs work and what outcomes we should be looking at, it would require an unprecedented amount of data sharing. It seems like I would have to share my internal data with you, and you would have to share data that you've got that in the past maybe wouldn't have been shared to come up with what the conclusions might be that we would come to with this particular decision.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Surprisingly, data access and data sharing hasn't been a rate limiting step. It hasn't been the biggest challenge that we're facing right now. Everyone everyone follows strictly HIPAA guidance. We are always running work and approving work through IRB processes. So there's oversight. There's certainly declaration of any conflicts of interest on both sides that is part of that process. But so here's the side story is obviously data integration. Data systems are becoming more advanced, more integrated. Now there are networks of data users forming nationally, PCORNet, being one of them as an example, where incredibly large pools of data are being assembled. And for that purpose of how can those data sets be harnessed to better inform healthcare decisions by all stakeholders, with the pharmaceutical industry, R&D being one of those stakeholders. So through data use agreements, through following HIPAA guidance, through IRB processes, and just through local guidelines and rules of how they're going to allow access to data, we've been able to navigate those waters so far. And the real information or the real value necessarily isn't in the data, but it's asking the right question and then applying it to those data. And then again, we're collaboratively working with partners to do the analytics on the data in de-identified ways and then come up with the answers to those questions.
So if the biggest challenge is not data sharing, what's the biggest challenge?
Yeah, there are a few of them. So just basic contracting, right? I know later we'll probably talk about what are career options and different ways a pharmacist can get involved in industry. A PharmD JD is never going to be a bad idea. The legal folks in the pharmaceutical industry will always have roles. As we try to get more creative and innovative working with our external partners, we need to have creative and innovative ways of designing contracts that will keep everyone safe and protect patient privacy, and yet open the door for these kind of partnerships. So I would say, basic contracting in a way that allows all that is a big challenge. Knowing the right questions to ask in new disease states, it takes a little bit of proactive planning, looking closely at early data, preclinical, clinical trial data, phase 1, phase 2, 2A, and figuring out what are really going to be the clinically relevant questions in late phase 3, just before this drug is launched, and being able to anticipate those. Those are harder for me in my role. But not so much the getting access to the data.
We have our audience is made up of graduate students, mostly PharmD students and pre-pharmacy students as well. So I'm going to sort of ask some questions that make you sort of give us what the landscape is. So you've talked about who you're interfacing. Well, who are you interfacing with in a health system? Are you going to the director of pharmacy, or are you going someplace else? Informatics people? Where do you go?
Yeah, that's a great question. So these advanced health systems, and by the way, the ones that we're partnering with are not necessarily ones that we're tracking down and making this pitch for let's collaborate because of these reasons. They're ones that are openly out there saying we're looking for partners. And so when we get together, we've gone past a lot of the discussion of why, and we're onto the discussion of how. And it's usually some of the leaders within that health system that are setting up what these engagements are designed to do, what the mission will be, what the focus will be, et cetera. So, chief healthcare information officers, and there's a lot of new titles that sort of have evolved in the last 5 years in healthcare, as you know. Chief healthcare information officers, now some health systems are naming chief innovation officers. So these are some of the folks, chairs of medicine, leading researchers, clinical researchers at some of these sites are the ones who are going to get the first read and take on some of these new treatments. So they're going to have some of the insights, since they also have a foot in the clinical practice world. They're going to have some of the insights on the benefits and the challenges that these new treatments are going to present, whether they're from a pharmacology profile, efficacy, safety, or a value, an economics profile. So those folks are always important to bring into the mix. And you mentioned informatics, and that's critical as well. Going back to the data discussion, you have to have really good data scientists to be able to manage the data and break it down in the ways that we need to and want to for the types of projects we're doing.
It's interesting. In the last month, we've had Bruce Chaffee and Jim Stevenson, whom you both know, also in the data information stage at different places. And it's amazing how this is the fastest growing area in pharmacy from my perspective, and great for job security.
Well, and I hate to say this, but I really don't, but the University of Michigan Department of Pharmacy has supplied our team with some great clinical informaticists recently. So we were fortunate enough to hire some University of Michigan colleagues, and they're huge assets to our team.
That's good to know. I'd like to turn this around if I can, though, because your job, it sounds like you're interfacing with health system people, and you're bringing something to the table, and they're bringing their data to the table. But can we turn around and have you look back at who are you interfacing with within Pfizer? All the different, because you talked about clinical trials. I've heard you say pharmacology. I'm sure there's marketing. I'm sure there's all kinds of outcomes people. What are some of the other, when you turn around and say, I'm facing Pfizer now, who is it that you're talking to help you make decisions and with these health system partners?
Yeah. And that, to be totally transparent, that has been one of my learning curves in the last 2 years with the new position that I've taken on. When my first segment of my career with Pfizer, I had a really more of a local area team that I worked with, which was not a true cross section of the entire company. In this new role, given some of the projects that I'm involved in and some of the deliverables that we're looking for, it's important to have that, wider cross section of the entire company engaged in the work that I'm doing. So it really is all of the folks you just mentioned, in addition to other medical affairs colleagues. There will be, going back to what I said before, there will be attorneys involved setting up contractually how we're going to conduct the projects. We have pharmacists that are also work closely with our attorneys strictly around our standard operating procedures, which link closely to making sure we stay compliant in all of the work we do. Huge compliance focus within the pharmaceutical industry. There are health and economics outcomes researchers, so we call them our HEOR colleagues. They're a huge part, an integral part of any real-world evidence generation project. Before any project gets launched, it goes through an intense statistics review. So we have PhD statisticians, the same folks who would be, getting involved in, perhaps some of our clinical research design, looking over our protocols and, kind of QAing them for, any statistical improvements or elements that need to be added. There is a firewall between medical and just say kind of commercial in Pfizer, and I would assume in most companies, so that any research related work is sort of completely self-contained and firewalled off from the commercial side of the company, and that's by design for compliance reasons. And yet, as new therapeutics are being developed, eventually a product team forms, which includes marketing people, and you need to consult with them to understand what indications are going to be pursued initially, what populations are making most sense based on ad boards that are done with clinicians in terms of where they think these new medicines will fit. So long story short, you're really going across most of the company. We have clinical informatics people. We have people that specifically focus on payer value issues. So if there's a question that you want to address that relates to a health plan and their considerations on what these new therapies will mean and how it'll impact their business, our payer value colleagues are going to be the ones you need to work closely with, because they interface with that side of the healthcare industry, daily.
So I've got a bunch of questions that have been submitted for me to ask, and it kind of falls along this line. And that is, you've already talked about a lot of places where PharmDs could have jobs in industry, and I guess we could talk more about that. And I'll start with, you are in the health system, at least part of the time when you're not working virtually. So is the people on the other side of the firewall, the sort of the sales force or marketing people. But also, I've had a lot of interface with medical science liaisons. And maybe you could explain how your job is similar or different to that kind of position, that MSL.
Yeah. My previous role with Pfizer was closer to an MSL role. The title is medical outcome specialist. We tend to focus more on local or regional health outcomes or healthcare economic analytic projects, quality improvement projects, population health projects at a more local regional level, and focusing in therapeutic areas where we have assets out on the market, approved medicines used in the treatment of patients currently. We also have a team that might fall under the bigger MSL umbrella called our field medical directors, and they are intended to be deep dive experts on specific therapeutic areas. So if a pharmacist or a physician that I was working with as an MOS had a very specific deep question on atrial fibrillation or cardiomyopathy, I would reach out to that FMD, bring them in, because there could be off-label types of information that was going to be asked or part of the response. That's all handled in a specific manner to be, to maintain compliance. So that's kind of our MSL team, if you will, combination of our MOS group and our FMD, our field medical director group. Yeah, so that would be our MSL army, if you will, our force of medical folks. The MOSs are all pharmacists by design from 23, 25 years ago when the team first started. Our FMDs are a kind of a compilation of pharmacists, physicians, PhD researchers, with various backgrounds, but expertise in that particular therapeutic area.
What advice would you give to somebody who would like to get a job, something like yours? So I guess we'll start with the students. Do you recommend getting a master's? Do you recommend industrial fellowships? Do you recommend getting a clinical job, residency clinical job sort of way, and then get good at a particular therapeutic area and then move? What those are, I suppose, are all paths, but maybe you could talk the audience through some of that.
Yeah, and I've done one-on-one discussions with students who are interested in careers in industry in the past, and I will always say the same thing: pursue what you're passionate about, and prepare yourself for additional training beyond the PharmD program. The PharmD program at Michigan is comprehensive. It's great. It's robust. All of the descriptors, but be prepared to gain additional training, whether it's a master's degree. There are a ton of certificate programs you can get online through Coursera and other virtual outlets. And then I bring up the PhD term, and that usually makes students cringe with just the thought of going through that arduous process. But really, it is a very competitive landscape out there. Not only PharmD's coming out, but even beyond that, folks looking for other opportunities, more research-based opportunities, jobs in industry, et cetera. The candidate pool we see, typical candidate we would see come through, and I'll think back to my previous position for an MOS spot, had a PharmD, had a master's degree in public health or an MS degree, or an MBA degree. I mean, they had usually some other add-on graduate degree, and at least 5 years of experience. But I know for a while there, it's been a little while since I've seen this statistic for our team, but for a while there, we were averaging about 10 years of experience of folks we were hiring. So I would say pursue your passions, get advanced training around those passions, get the experience, get good experience related to those areas, and then just keep your eyes on LinkedIn or whatever your source of choice is, and see how jobs are being posted, what positions are coming available, and what are the prereqs for those positions, what are they asking for. And then if they're at that level and ready to start interviewing, do some interviews, and you'll find out very quickly where your gaps are, or if you're ready to take on one of those roles. But pursuing your passion is more important than anything, because it's it definitely is. It becomes your calling, and you should not be looking for adding on degrees or credentials as a means to get a job down the road. You should be doing it based around your motivators and your interests.
What are the job prospects for somebody who does go get that training, that master's or whatever it would be?
I think they're great. We've been very adaptive in the last 3 to 5 years with the folks that we're hiring, and the clinical informaticists that we hired from the University of Michigan, I'd say is a great example of that. 7 years ago, we weren't looking for those people. Within the last 3 years, they've become critical, and that team, just that little micro team, has expanded, dramatically. And I believe most the folks that we've hired recently both have master's degrees in addition to their PharmD. So with the right training, there are great opportunities. With a PharmD coming right out of school, the opportunities, in all honesty, would be somewhat limited. There may be some regulatory affairs positions, but even that would potentially depend on your experiences as a student and what internships you may have been able to get during the summer, or that type of thing. So
I'll point out to the audience that we have combined master's programs, not only with the School of Business, but also public health. And of course, we have the PharmD PhD to do that health economics and outcomes research as well as sort of clinical pharmacy type research. One of the things, in my job, it's how many grants do I get and how many papers do I write and how good of a teacher I am. And if I went back when I was a clinical pharmacist, how many patients I took care of and whatever projects I did. How do you know if you're doing a good job, or how does your boss know? How is success measured?
boy, you asked some good questions, Bruce. That's
Starting to get good at this. I've been doing it now for the year. I'm getting better.
And that actually, for all the students who might be listening to this, that is a great question, maybe rephrased a little bit. Every time you go in for an interview, how will this position be judged? How will it be evaluated? What will I be graded on, or whatever?
Always ask that in an interview, students. Always ask that.
Yeah. So publications, actually, as important as they were when I was at the University of Michigan, they still are important, but maybe for slightly different reasons. I don't know. Publications now mean that means that information is getting disseminated in the public domain. And a lot of times that's half our goal, is to generate new evidence, new information, and get it in front of healthcare providers. But then we have some more mundane metrics, right? So I mentioned, you could tell from my descriptions that a lot of what I'm doing is identifying new project opportunities, new innovative research and QI types of projects, and executing them. So in order for us to get to project start date, day one, there's a whole host of steps that have to get to that point. First of all, we have to align with our client on what we want to do. So that scope of work has to be defined, the research questions, the objectives, all the things the students are learning in some of their, project research design classes. Then we have to align on a budget. The budget has to be built into the scope of work. And then we have to align on a contract. And each one of those steps, depending on if we've contracted with an organization in the past or not, it can be a lot of unknowns, a lot of new challenges that we have to solve for as we go through the process. So getting a contract signed and a project started is a mundane metric, but it's one you have to kind of decide very carefully every year. Am I going to put this on my business plan? Because if I do, I'm committed to it. And if it doesn't get done, knowing all of the pitfalls that could go wrong along the way, then I'll get dinged for it in my evaluation. But yeah, so that would be another important metric, is, are you able to get projects set up, designed, and launched in a timely fashion?
All right, we don't have a couple minutes left. I want to talk about, you really made a courageous switch. You really changed your job quite a bit. And I guess I want to hear a little bit about that. Also, you took care of patients directly as a pharmacist, and then does the current job scratch that itch of still making a difference, and how do you reconcile that sort of change, which is no longer a direct patient care piece?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer the second part first. It's not the same, right? So if you're in the phase of your career where direct patient care is a must-have, that's what drives you as a pharmacist. It's the only thing that's going to really give you the gratification of being a pharmacist. Then you probably would not be extremely happy doing what in a role similar to mine right now, because you don't get that. You don't get that direct patient care. Although I will say that I'm finishing up some requirements to become immunization trained. So I may be doing some volunteering. So, getting kind of thrown back a little bit in the patient care arena. So that's going to be kind of exciting. But day-to-day routine patient care, being part of a team, as I was when I was before I left University of Michigan, you don't get that same kind of thrill or direct immediate gratification of helping patients. But the reasons that I think, when I was weighing all of this 23 years ago or so, the reasons that I did make the switch were compelling enough where I finally said, you know, that I'm going to try it. It was a good point in my life, age wise, career wise. It was a good point to try it. And if it turned out to be something I, you know, hated, I would have a chance to bounce back into healthcare. And some of the people who I started with at Pfizer at that time actually did that. We started in the same roles. They maybe, you know, did this for a year, 2, 3, and then decided, you know what, I want to get back to healthcare. And it was an easy transition back for them. I've found since the day I made that switch that it has been never looking back. It's been exciting. There's always new things coming, a lot of variety, a lot of challenges, like any job, right? Challenges, frustrations, but you know, mixed in there are some amazing, gratifying moments where you go, boy, this was really a great decision that I made on, you know, back on day X. Funny story, when I interviewed for the job, got offered the job, said, could I have 24 hours? Person said, yes, you can. 24 hours later, she calls me. I said, can I have 24 hours? She said, no, I need an answer. It was the hardest decision that I had to make in my career professionally. And at some point, I just listened to a voice deep inside and said, okay, I accept the position. And it was a scary moment. And there was a week there where I was like, what did I just do? Because I always thought coming back to the University of Michigan after my residency was going to be the be all and end all. That was going to be my career start and ending point. And it just didn't work out that way. But it's been a very good journey. Very happy with my decision.
Well, I'll let you have the last word. Anything you'd like to say to alumni who might be tuned in to thinking about the job change, or to our prospective students and current students about potentially thinking about following along your sort of type of work?
I would say consider it a normal part of career evolution. Healthcare is changing as fast right now as it's ever changed. When you look at the types of technologies and treatments that are in development right now, it's going to continue to change at a dramatic breakneck speed. And so it's probably not realistic to think that you're going to come out with your credentials, the only credentials you'll ever need from the College of Pharmacy, and then you're going to go into the job that the only job you'll ever have, and that it'll keep you satisfied and competent and capable of meeting everyone's needs for your entire career. So be nimble, think about career evolution as normal, and be ready to sort of go out and get the credentials you need, as difficult as that may be to stomach or afford, depending on what you'd pursue. Get that additional training so that you're in the right position to be in line for those jobs that are going to make you happy in your career.
Well, Dr. Townsend, I really appreciate it. I'm going to put your email address on the screen right now. Is it all right if people contact you if they've got further questions?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for being a guest. This may have been the best program we've done so far. I really appreciate you being on In the Interim. Thank you, audience.
Thanks, Bruce.
Bye-bye.